Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Sparring Partners webinar on getting Open RAN up and running. Our speakers today are Kalyan Sundhar, VP and GM of Edge to Core at Keysight, and Monica Paolini, Principal at Sensafili. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video. We would like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. So please share your comments and questions using the chat and QA buttons on the Zoom taskbar. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they come in and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed, so no need to hold your questions until the end. And with that, I will hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure always to be here. And today we are talking again about Open RAN. This is something that in Sparring Partners we've been covering quite a lot. And we had a Sparring Partner recently in September with Ravi Sinha talking with the Open Alliance hat about Open RAN and 6G. And more recently, we had the pleasure to talk to Simona Marinova at Bell Canada about RIC, which is the new hot topic within Open RAN. Today, we're talking about something that it's really close to my heart, which is the whole issue about how you test it, how you make sure, you test, monitor, and optimize Open RAN, which is really crucial in order to bring Open RAN to a commercial status. So we all know that from a technology point of view, everything is ready to go. It's all very exciting. However, there is a question of maturity, how you ensure Open RAN delivers in practice in a commercial network what it promises. And so what we're going to talk about today is how can you make sure that this is working? And this was we planned it way before a little bit before the recent announcements came out about from AT&T, OnePlus One, and DT about actually moving forward. So clearly there is a sense of urgency and something that is happening right now. So we're going to talk about that, but this is kind of a sort of a broader topic we're discussing today, which the recent announcements make even more urgent. And I am delighted to have with me today Kalyan Sundhar from Keysight, who has been working for quite some time on making sure Open RAN is more than a technology, it is a product. So anyway, so let's get started as usual. And so I would like to, first of all, thank Kalyan to be with us today. And Kalyan, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me here. I think it's a pleasure. My name is Kalyan Sundhar. I drive Open RAN for Keysight and have been participating with many of the industry experts in the ecosystem right from its inception. It is perfect timing. Like you said, I think if we had this meeting about a month ago, it would have been a little different. There's a lot of questions about is Open RAN really taking off, but just so many announcements coming right at the end of the year. And this is exactly the boost the industry needed. So we'll talk more about that and the readiness of the technology itself through the course of the next hour. But very glad to be here, and it's a pleasure working and answering your questions here.
Yes, and you, Kalyan, personally, and Keysight have been doing a lot of work on this area. So maybe we can start and talk about how Open RAN is more than just disaggregation. So yes, it's disaggregation, it's a virtual RAN, it's all sorts of things, but it also changes the way we test, we make sure that the RAN performs in the right way. Because you no longer have, one vendor making sure that everything works. You have all those different vendors, they all need to work with each other. How is that changing the way operators work, but also the way you work at Keysight? You have to, there's a lot of change for you going on as well. We always think about, what mobile operators are doing, but you're doing things differently as well.
Absolutely. And Open RAN certainly opens the number of interfaces and number of things that you have to validate. So I just had a quick slide that probably we will use as a talking point, and we can go through that. And again, feel free to interject, Monica, with questions as we go through that. So I'm going to just bring up a slide here. Give me a second. Which could be very useful in explaining this. So again, I'm not going to go into Open RAN in depth, but I want to point out to a few areas which are very important when you move from a RAN technology, which is what I'm showing as a picture. And hopefully you can see the picture, Monica. Just wanted to validate that. So as we move to Open RAN, there's a few pieces that obviously there's disaggregation. Everybody has heard that before. You're taking the radio unit, separating out the baseband. You're taking the baseband and moving it into different components. And this obviously gives opportunity to many, many players coming into play. Like a server company could come in, and they are coming in. There is telco cloud that hosts some of these components. There is stacks from different vendors, radios from different vendors, and again, the RIC and X apps and R apps, which we'll talk about. I want to point to three main things, and this we will use in the context of the discussion over the next hour. First is we all talked about the disaggregation and open interfaces. Clearly, the one that has gotten a lot of, I would say, forethought and industry momentum is the open front haul. Why this is important is because now you really have the best of breed radio coming in and talking to just the baseband units. And the baseband, as a result of this, can be separated out into what we call containers, and they can actually start being hosted, scaled elastically. So this gives the operators opportunity to bring in new vendors. It gives the operators to diverse themselves from purpose-built hardware. So there's just a lot of benefits here. But the open front haul has from day one been one that is attended to the most, because there's just a lot of work going on. ORAN Alliance has been on the forefront of this. And recently, it's also opened the doors a bit more. Ericsson coming into play here, where we are talking about, great, you have traditional radios, and I can connect in traditional remote radios over to the baseband unit. Open front haul is fine as the way it was defined. And again, technology, there's a category A, category B. Where do you place the brains? Do you put a lot more on the radio side? Makes the radio complex, makes the radio more expensive, but reduces the cost of information that you're transporting over the open front haul. And the DU becomes a little bit less functional at that point. On the other hand, you can pack a lot of things into the DU, which means the radio becomes a little bit dumbed down version. Radios are cheaper, but then you're sending a lot of information across on the transport. So happy medium is, how do I balance it out between the radio and the DU? And that's what the open front haul is all about. There's something called low-level split. But what I want to call attention to is recently, starting summer of this year, there was something called uplink performance improvement that has come into play. And uplink performance improvement is very important as you move from traditional radios into massive MIMO radios. Without massive MIMO radios, the operators are not going to be wooed into moving from RAN to Open RAN. That's a very key ingredient for them as they move to the deployment stages. They want to see massive MIMO radios work. Massive MIMO radios have a big bearing on the transport of open front haul that's out there. So there's been a lot of debate on where exactly you place some functions, like the interference cancellation or the equalization function. Do you put it on the RU? Do you put it on the DU? And that is taking shape. That started this summer, and by first quarter, second quarter 2024, you will see more coming out there. But this has also brought Ericsson into the race because they've been a big proponent of this. And of course, there is a lot of value in ensuring that you have an optimal balance between how intelligent the radio is versus how much you're transporting on the front haul and make the DU do all the work. So that's a very key area. And there's a lot of testing going on for that. So it's extremely important when you do this, because now the testing multiplies. The DU vendors have to support the radios that are non-massive MIMO, that are not going to support ULPI. So it just quadruples the number of things they do. And there's two versions, as always. There's a ULPI-A, there's a ULPI-B. All these versions have to be supported. They're not going to find out in the field as to what's happening. So the DU has to get ready with all these variations, and this has to be verified. So it's just made testing even more important on the front haul. So that's one area. I'll pause there, Monica. I'm sure there might be some questions because it's very relevant to Ericsson coming into play, and also taking it from a technology perspective into deployment.
No, absolutely. And I would like to ask everybody in the audience to, use the opportunity that you have to ask all the questions you might have to Kalyan or to me, but we have the expert here. Actually, we do have a question just came in from the audience. Okay, so let me read the question here. Do you think that in the coming years there is going to be an ORAN eruption for brownfield, and is it driven by the x86 free rapids with ORAN boost for fourth generation chipset commercialized? And maybe we can expand it a little bit, because the interesting thing about the recent announcements is that we do have two of them up from brownfields, and one is from 1&1, which is a greenfield. And so maybe you can comment on that in terms of, is the coming year, well, I would say the coming year, first and foremost, is it, are we just finally going over the bump, and now we're going to see all the deployments when everybody was complaining? We see all those trials, but no real deployments outside greenfields. Is that are we at an inflection point here?
I think so. I think it's a good question, and also an expanded thing from your side, Monica. Clearly, the announcement from AT&T and just yesterday from DT were very important for brownfield operators to gain more confidence. You're also looking at some inflection points for moving from RAN to Open RAN. Vodafone is a good example where they need a RAN refresh as contracts start expiring. They are interested in moving to new technology, which is Open RAN. They've been doing a lot of trials as well. So there are some heavyweight brownfield operators coming into play in full support. And I think clearly that is also near term. One of the things that was talked about before was, is this 3 years out? Is it 5 years out? But very clearly, starting with the AT&T announcement and starting with the Deutsche Telekom announcement, these are going to start happening in 2024. Vodafone is already doing trials in UK, and even doing some inter-operator trials between Vodafone and Orange in Romania, where they made a 4G call over an Open RAN network. So there is a lot of live things happening in real networks where they are bringing up sites, and these may be smaller sites, rural areas, so on, but definitely there is action that's happening in the live network compared to where it was a few months back. So inflection point is clearly happening now. I think a lot of other things will go with it, including the verifiability, the security, how much energy you're saving, and so on. So there's just a lot of other facets that will go on with it.
Absolutely. And I think that, there is in the commentary on those announcements and the reaction, I think that we're kind of overlooking at the sort of relative, well, in this case, for Ericsson clearly getting a good deal with AT&T, and Nokia being left out in that specific deal. But I think that we should not be really looking at this at the sort of the short term. I mean, clearly there is a reason to look at that way, but I think that we need to look at it the longer perspective. And because it's disaggregated, even if you get a deal with one vendor, it doesn't exclude the others, because that's the whole nature of Open RAN. But at the same time, it's also true that the ability, the disaggregation is going to add a more dynamic, more dynamics to the market split, because things can change in a more fluid way. So you're not committed to a vendor that you pick today for the rest of the decade or something like that. Is that, you see that happening as well?
Yeah, and there were statements from some of these operators also, which validate that, right? I mean, they've been very clear that Nokia is not out of the race. This has come out from AT&T as well. Clearly, the first phase is going to Ericsson, and Fujitsu radios are in as well. They've also named a few others that are coming in, like Dell servers are coming in, and certainly they want to expand the pool. And they've said by no means are we leaving out anybody forever, right? There's going to be things that come in potentially in the future. We have seen evidence of that even in the greenfield, haven't we? When Dish started, they started with a set of, I call them disruptors, or really the innovators that were coming in with Open RAN. But they changed. I mean, Samsung had a chance to get into Dish later. So I think this is exactly what Open RAN was created for. It puts more onus, but also more flexibility for the operators. They have the option of selecting vendors, mixing and matching vendors, and selecting somebody else. So the cost of peeling out rip and replace is lesser, because as they build out, they may choose to use or bring in other vendors. And clearly that's going to foster innovation. If you have a better massive MIMO radio, or if you have a better, elastically scalable version of your stack or DU, I think you're going to be in game. And I think all of them are very open from what we have talked to. That's exactly what this was created for. They're looking at it, bringing in innovation, and also the best of breed will survive in this.
Yeah, and we have another question that I'm just going to go before we go to energy efficiency, from William, that he asked if Oran is really open, what key features make the difference among suppliers like Ericsson and Nokia and others. And I think that this is sort of, it's an interesting question, because you bring the question, what is open, and I'm start using the word open without a capital O when I talk about Open RAN, because there are different ways to define openness, and there is openness at different levels. So for instance, you have openness at the REC level, RAN level, so the UNCU and front haul interface, and then at the chipset level. So there is all sorts of ways in which you can be open, which go beyond the front haul, which add in complexity, and then makes the way that vendors differentiate among each other to be, somewhat subtle. So there is a lot of opportunity for differentiation, but it's not just one big feature. And Kalyan, maybe you can talk about when you test the different equipments, what do you see? How much difference do you see? Since because the argument could be, since they all use the same open interfaces, are they all going to be performing the same way?
No, definitely not. In fact, let me just share something here. So if you look at the enablers for Open RAN, and I want to just pick on one aspect here called 5G challenge in the performance. So again, the game was always about testing for interoperability, conformance. That's where things were. And that's table stakes, right? You got to be interoperable. If you put A and B together, if they don't talk with each other, that's just table stakes. There were obviously challenges, because the standards were still being defined. They were still being solidified. and for everybody to look at it the same way. And there's still some challenges as we move forward, but most of those are just a natural evolution, which we've been seeing from the 3G days. There's nothing new here, where when you bring in multiple components, you're going to see the standards taking time to make sure things are solidified. So that's the first step, and OTICs are doing that. OTICs are, the test and integration centers, the open test and integration centers that are out there. And governments are really helping create these OTICs in many, many countries. It started with 5 or 6 in the beginning. Now we have about 17 OTICs that have been approved, just 7 alone in the United States. So there's just a lot of OTICs that are looking at the conformance interoperability and doing some testing end to end. But what is also evident is to take from step 1 that I've called out here, the functional validation, to the deployment readiness. There's a huge gap. Just because you're conformant and interoperable doesn't mean you're ready for deployment. And so one of the things that the NTIA did was to work with Cable Labs to do something called 5G Challenge. And the 5G Challenge was not just to prove that you're interoperable, and there were many stages, but as you went through stages, I mean, there were vendors coming in and dropping out and so on. It got more and more interesting, including doing handovers between different vendors. Doing performance, with the data, with the voice, making sure latency was adhered to. So the testing got a little bit more than, are we just, conformant and interoperable? No, it's more than that. It's performance coming into play. And then you start, it's going to expand even further into massive MIMO. I talked about previously, what challenges does massive MIMO bring in? Because without massive MIMO bringing there, it's going to be hard to deploy it in dense urban areas. So that is going to be a must. And then comes the whole energy efficiency. We have talked about that. Operators are really looking at how to save energy and costs here. And that's very important because you're bringing in a lot of components. There's a good and bad. The good thing is you do have the ability to control components independently. As an example, 73% of the energy is being spent on the RAN side. But if you add a monolith, it's going to be difficult to know where you tune and tweak. You can do it, but you're going to be just talking to one and they're going to look at savings. But operators now have the opportunity to really work with some radio vendors, which is where a lot of energy is spent, to see how to optimize that. They can then work separately with the baseband vendors and those that are sitting on servers to see how they can optimize that. So there's just opportunity here for the operators to really look at the whole energy end to end, but also start rifle shooting specific components and saying, how do I improve the energy in each of these areas? So that becomes a vital component as you move forward as well.
Yes, and in fact, we have a question from Esham about ORAN and energy efficiency and sustainability, which are two different things. And actually, I'm going to send you a link in a second about a report that I did that also includes an interview with Keysight on what is Keysight specifically doing in that area. And maybe, Kalyan, you can tell us a little bit about how you help operators, because every operator wants to be more energy efficient and more sustainable. That's sort of, we know that. The question is how to actually get there. That is not trivial at all, because it's not just choosing equipment that is more energy efficient. There is more than that. And I don't know whether you want to comment on that, because I find it really fascinating, because you have to put together energy efficiency and performance. It's not just, if you try to be completely energy efficient, you just switch off all the network and you're very efficient, but you're not gonna, that's not a good way to go. So how can you balance the two? How can you help operators doing that?
Absolutely. So we did an experiment, and this was initiated by Vodafone along with us and several other partners, including Dell, Intel, Samsung, Wind River, and Capgemini. We all got together last year, and we basically tried to understand the Vodafone profile and understand where the energy, where energy was being spent based on these traffic profiles. And we also recommended how we could do some energy savings based on that profile. And the experiment yielded about 9 to 12% energy savings for Vodafone based on that profile. So that obviously kindled a lot of interest in the industry, because that was one of the early studies on how for Open RAN you could really get into an energy, first understanding your energy consumption, and then how do you save the energy. Like you said, you can shut off all the networks out there, all the radios, and then you will be very energy efficient, but then you won't have any traffic through your network. So there is a challenge of how much do you shut off, when you shut off, what you shut down, and all that. And that obviously will require a lot of data. And this is where the rig comes in, right? So when it's one of the cases where the rig comes in. So when you have all this data, then you can actually take these and train the XApps to really understand your patterns. And using AI ML, you can actually suggest and do a model where you can turn on and off energy sites and radios, and lower the C states, as they call it, on the processors. There's just a lot of things that can be done. That activity has kicked off, but it started with an operator. More operators are interested in seeing how they can bring down the energy, because it directly is an optimization of the costs. One of the challenges, and industry is studying this and seeing how they can overcome it, is just the time it takes to bring back up a cell. So if you shut down a cell, that's one thing, but to bring it back up, you might be struggling a bit. And if you take too much time, there's a lot of traffic flowing during that time. So just knowing those things, and again, this is where AI ML is going to be at the forefront. First thing is to provide the data of what is being consumed and how things can be saved. And once you have these training models there, it's going to get to the point where the XApps and RApps really start telling the network, okay, this is what you need to be doing from an energy perspective.
Absolutely. Now, before we continue with our plan, there is another question from Aaron, and he's asking, would you think that brownfield operators would still play cautiously in the ORAN introduction and still consider traditional vendors like Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung? And if we study Verizon and AT&T case, they're not getting multiple vendors in the same network. So for instance, AT&T heavily uses Ericsson for the UC, USMO, and Fujitsu for the RU, and Verizon does almost the same and not having many vendors. And I have to say that this is something that I've been talking about since the beginning, is that if you're a mobile operator and you understand you want to go Open RAN, you don't necessarily want to have a huge number of vendors at the beginning, because the more vendor, the more complexity, regardless of who the vendor are and who you are, how big you are, anything. This is kind of like, no matter what you do, the more vendors, the more complexity. So you embark in a new type of RAN architecture, you want to keep the complexity at the minimum. So you might want to have on day one only one player per element in the RAN, and then grow rather than have that many. But even as you go and as you move forward, you probably don't need to have that many vendors. You want to be able to have the option to add as many vendors as you want to, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have every vendor on the planet on your network. And so can you tell us, when you work with operators, what do you see? How many vendors? And clearly there is no answer. There is no, it's like number 5 or number 10, whatever. But how do they decide how many vendors to include in their trials and commercial deployments?
Yeah, no, I think there are two aspects here, right? Like you clearly said, you're not going to proliferate with more and more vendors, but there are other players that are getting in, like a Dell, a Red Hat. These are companies that are definitely getting in, Radisys for the stacks. So there's a mix and match going on where I don't have to run an Ericsson DU on an Ericsson purpose-built hardware. I'm going to run an Ericsson DU or a Nokia DU on a Dell server, on an HP server. So that vertically, you are mixing and matching. You don't have to have just the same vendors coming in. Now, for a baseband, are you going to bring in everybody into the game? I don't think there's just a lot of testing to be done, so they're going to be cautious about doing that. There is also, for brownfield operators, since the question came from brownfield, they have an install base. So they have to leverage the install base. These operators are not going to give up the install base and completely bring everything brand new. Now, so there is going to be a conversion for some of these, from going from a traditional RAN to potentially a vRAN, which is, again, not mixing and matching, but running virtualized loads, and then moving from a vRAN to ORAN. Some would skip the step of going from a RAN to an ORAN directly, especially if there is a refresh cycle possible, where let's talk about probably there's a new spectrum that's being announced or a new deployment. Great opportunity to go in directly in ORAN. But when they're going into existing networks, you're not going to tear it apart and go into completely ORAN. There's going to be probably a stepwise approach. Yes, definitely fewer players, but I don't think the new players are locked out. Even the announcement we saw recently with 1&1, Mavenir is in there. They are providing the core. Rakuten and Mavenir are the two partners that have been identified. So you are seeing that, and you're seeing with Vodafone. Yes, Samsung came in, but Nokia is still part of that. There's trials going on with others as well. We can't name them because they're not public yet. But there's just a lot of things where the innovators are not being pushed out, and they have certain things they have brought to the forefront earlier in the game, and that's also going to help. So it's of course the incumbents are going to fight to keep their slots, and it'll be good for the entire industry to see this because it's going to definitely foster innovation between the incumbents and then the new players, just like it has always when you open up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we should see, I guess that one way to look at it is that, yeah, we should see changes, but it's not going to be all of a sudden the whole thing is going to change in terms of the relationship within vendors. So, and I guess that the most interesting part is going to be what we're going to see in terms of changes in the long term. Because there's just going to be something in the short term, but what does that mean for the long term? I think that's going to be interesting. And
yeah, and we have some good examples, right? If you take the core network, the announcement from AT&T was roughly around 10 years ago when they're going to virtualize. But the incumbents were, pretty much behemoths in that space, and they weren't considered for the movement into virtualization. In fact, AT&T picked Affirm Networks at that time, and Affirm was a small company in Boston that was doing it because they had something niche, and AT&T also wanted to shake it up and show that, hey, if I'm going for a software play, I have the option of going with somebody who's got a niche area of expertise. So that's a great example. And of course, it took time. Affirm is now part of Microsoft, as we all know, but it can happen. And we are seeing, there were questions about radios. Fujitsu radios are coming in a strong way. So these are definitely Fujitsu. It's also a globalization of sorts, right? Fujitsu heavily in the Japan market and Asia market, now coming out more into North America. So there's just there's a mix and match, and I think whoever is going to show the most potential and most advancement is going to still be considered.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit more about Keysight and what is that you do. How do you? I mean, as we said, there's a whole lot that needs to be done in a new way when it comes to testing, monitoring, and optimizing the network. And in the same way that there is for the operator, for the other vendor, for the brand vendors, there is for you guys a way to differentiate yourself. And can you tell us what is that you think that you do different that is special about your specific approach to Open RAN?
Certainly, we'll talk about that. I'm going to show you a couple of slides, which again will be very, pictorial and visual for everybody to see. So I do want to make one point on the MVP. It's a very important thing that's going on right now. MVP stands for most valuable or minimum viable product, however you want to define it. But the reason for this is as you go from all the testing you've done with OTIX and PluckFest and so on, there's just a lot of activity and getting excitement. How do you really take it from that point on to deployment? And we call this the operator readiness or the deployment readiness. And for that, we are striving to create something called MVP, and Keysight is heavily involved in that in creating this MVP. This is not something that's just going to be defined from the ORAN Alliance. This has to come from operators in conjunction with the ORAN Alliance. And there's meetings going on, and February there's going to be another discussion with the findings and so on. But this is going to be vital to see what is the set of profiles that operators can give, saying this is what we would like to see as we deploy. So from AT&T or 1&1 or DT or whoever else, I think we want to see that. And when we see that, I think those will be validated again. So we'll make sure that all the companies that are coming into play there are able to validate against those profiles. So that is going to create some common ground for going from a lab environment into a live environment. So very, very important. So I want to tee it off with that because many of the things that we have done in the Vodafone Keysight handbook is also very relevant, and we have taken a step in that direction. If you see this slide here, basically we divided the whole handbook into 3 categories of testing. The first category is to do end-to-end, and the RAN and core testing. And we want to be doing it both from a lab and from the live perspective as to what's happening in a live environment. We have monitors that we can check on the RAN side, on the core side, packet brokers that really tap into things, the core network, which is virtualized already, analyzers on the front haul, seeing how the RU and DU are operating, and just the RAN testing and the core testing. We surround that with interoperability units that we have. So we have like very specialized things, like for Ethernet, we have something called time sync analyzer that we bring into play. And we have many emulators that we bring. The second stage is a little bit, again, it's a very big visual here, a lot of things showing up, but I want to highlight that now you want to really isolate some of these components. You want to do ORU surround testing. And this is where Keysight brings in a lot of things that we have done over the last several years to perfection, like the vector signal analyzers, vector signal generators from classic Keysight, as we call it. And then we bring in the whole timing element, from one of the acquisitions we got. And we have put all this together to do a comprehensive testing of the ORU. That's the box number 2 that's shown here. And then we also get into other elements such as security. One of the big challenges as you get into this level of, we are getting closer to deployment, is security becomes a huge challenge. More openness means more security threats, more interfaces, more attack surfaces. A lot of it is Ethernet. So again, we have a history there of doing a lot of Ethernet security testing, but still there is going to be just various combinations. And there are things defined like the SCAS units or the SCAS test suites that we support at various levels. You have it at specific core elements, the G Node B, the RAN, so on and so forth. And again, we are participating heavily in the work groups to enable that. This is the ORAN work group 11 that defines security. Then you have the whole, we talked about the ORU, but we also want to talk about the RIC, right? Where you are really starting to think about not just the interfaces, but use cases. And the use cases are going to be the enablers for RIC, because the RIC is nothing but a platform which hosts all these XApps and RApps that are going to do energy efficiency or massive MIMO traffic steering. When it sees that a cell is overloaded, how can it divert traffic to another cell? There is just a lot of innovation there. So we have started attacking a bunch of use cases with a live tinge to it. This is where, when we work with operators and get operator data, you can actually feed the data. So the RApps and XApps can really see live data and not, some lab data. And when you have that, it's really going to show whether the applications are performing the way you want it to perform. So there's a validation of sorts there as you bring RIC into the picture that magnifies, because there's multiple applications. And if you take it a step further, these applications have to work with each other. Some of these applications are not the only applications running on that platform. So there is, things that are coming out in terms of congestion and management between applications that we are working on as well. So we're just breaking into categories, and the final one is going to be the energy efficiency savings. We talked about that before, and also feeding the live data back from the field into the lab. And we have tools for that as well. If you see, we have painted the city red here with all our tools, but the blue ones are the boxes that are going into the network. So we surround it, we do end-to-end, We do the vertical stuff where we are not just testing conformance and interop. We are doing security, we are doing energy efficiency, and we are feeding all the data of what we see live, capture it in the field, and bring it back to the lab to do the analysis and see what needs to happen. So again, we call it Cora. That's our product. It's called Keysight Open RAN Architect. And we have mapped this handbook that we co-authored with Vodafone, and we have mapped all our profiles and test simulators and suites to that. And that's a work in progress. It's 60 pages already, but it's going to be, several hundred pages as people expand. And with the MVPs, I think the combination of these two will be powerful in terms of how we test this for readiness.
Yeah, it is a little bit daunting picture of to look at everything that you have to do, but this is really, I guess that one way to look at it, it's an opportunity, because the more things you can test for and optimize, the more value you should be able to squeeze out of the network if you do it properly. And and so I guess it is challenging when you look at it and say, oh my God. But at the same time, that means that you have more control over the fine tuning of your network. Is that the way you look at it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And see, some of these are, you don't have to have everything, right? I mean, you're going and talking to a RU vendor, then you focus on the RU side. First of all, are you conformant? And second, how are you interoperating with others that you want to interoperate with? And third, what about the energy savings and other things, right? How energy efficient are you? How secure are you? So those are very specifically for that particular vendor. That's all they need to worry about. They don't need to worry about what's happening in the core. But there are operators who are interested in all of this. They want to see, automation of all of this. They want to see analytics that come out of this. It's all about data. They want a lot of data fed to them. And once they have the data, then comes AI ML, where they can start really looking at models that can emanate out of this and say, okay, I got a lot of good data. And with this data, I can really create some models that will start auto-tuning my network over time. So I think it's definitely headed in that direction.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to go back to automation, since you mentioned it, but before that, you also mentioned security. And we have a question from Hesham about how Oren is going to support 5G first responder public safety. I would say that, it's no different than any other network. And I think that in general, Open RAN has to perform at parity, at least, with any other RAN. So we're not going backwards. We have to move forward. But I don't know, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you said it right. I think there is that's also very important as you move forward and deploy Open RAN, that it is on par, and part of it is just the comprehensiveness and the parity with existing networks has to be there, especially for brownfield. And again, cases where you also have to know how to interoperate with existing networks that are non-Open RAN. And a lot of times that's also going to be the case. Just like you do from technology to technology, when you move from 4G to 5G, you have to interoperate with the previous technology. Same here, no difference. When you're not getting the coverage or when you're not getting a certain thing, you need to know to fall back onto a existing network that can provide that. But yeah, largely that's correct, Monica.
Yeah, okay, very good. Now, let's talk about automation. And the reason why I like to talk about it, because you look at all of this and, humans are very limited in terms of what is that you can optimize at the same time and all the interactions. So here you have potentially so many things going on at the same time that you do need automation to keep track of things, or to make sure things actually work the way they're supposed to. So what is your approach to automation? I mean, we all know that we need it, but how exactly are you working on that?
Yeah, so every simulator we build has a REST interface that we have a automation engine that we hook up to. We also have the ability for the customers, the CI/CD and automation engines, to hook up and create tests from our simulation, make it part of the go to live. And also some of them are in the live networks as well. You can look at some of the test cases can be triggered from a slice of a network. That's the beauty of network slicing. We have seen that as well as you go all the way from a lab to a production. So the key for us is to, what we've done from day one is have a unified interface across the board, across all these, which will allow for the operators to hook into and create tests. We provide canned tests as well, but again, there's never going to be enough tests, so there's always somebody creating more and more tests. So we provide the ability for the operators and our vendors. It doesn't have to be just operators, it's also many of the vendors that buy our equipment to create more and more tests using our tool set and integrate it into their CI/CD pipeline. And that's vital because they have to determine at any point when they test a load whether it's ready to move from a lab prototype or a sandbox stream into a production stream, and vice versa. How do they take something that's in production stream and quickly bring it back to the sandbox stream? And these are only going to happen with automation, like you rightly said. And we have the tools to hook into, and we also have a story. That's why we put it at the top. The automation reporting and analytics is, we have an engine for that. So operators or vendors who don't have something like that, they come to us and they get the whole automation package from us. But we can also rifle shoot and give them conformance suites, interoperability suites, performance suites, and so on. So we create those as well.
Absolutely. Very good. Now, I want to make sure we go back to talk about a little bit about the role of government, regulation, and support. You mentioned it earlier. I want to make sure we cover it before the end of the event. This is kind of interesting because a lot of governments and a lot of regulators have taken a strong stance in support of Open RAN, which is kind of unusual because they would usually support things like 5G and 6G, but Open RAN is a specific technology, and so they're trying to be technology neutral, but yet there is a lot of support for Open RAN. But you can argue that because it's open, it's a way to move forward on technology neutrality because you just give everybody a chance to participate. How do you see the role there, and what is your take in terms of what is that you see Keysight doing in terms of helping out that process?
A great question, and absolutely, I think what is fascinating with Open RAN is the support the governments have provided. I will start with the NTIA in North America. Through the Biden CHIPS Act, they sent out feelers for proposals to come in, and they call it NOFO funding, the first round of funding. All the submissions are in. Some of them have been granted. And the second round is going to come out, proposals are going to come out, or solicitation of proposals will come out next year. Why is the government interested in that, right? So first is it certainly allows the technology to move faster. There is also opportunity for the individual governments, and this is not just United States. Clearly, we have seen this in UK, we have seen this in Japan, Spain, and many other countries are coming up with similar things. There's made in the country and more opportunity created for innovation in specific countries that are also coming out as a result, which is very important because we all know what happened with some of the earlier technologies where some companies had the backing of their governments and they were able to go faster. So I think all the governments are understanding that, and they're definitely pumping in more interest. And it's not just money, it's also things like the 5G challenge, which was funded through the NTIA, which allowed for more validation to happen. And we were front and central in that because we had to be the test vendor where we could validate, multiple vendors coming in and being interoperable and also being performant to certain categories. And that was all driven by NTIA giving prize monies and funding. But without the government doing that, would vendor A and vendor B found a way to collaborate? They might have in the Plugfest, but chances are not with this kind of a regimented time bound type of activity that we went through in the 5G challenge. So we have been part of that. To answer your question, how we enable that, we have definitely been part of that. But just the also many OTICs have been created, and a lot of them are universities. If you notice, some of them that have come out, Northeastern University, Rutgers, and Powder Labs, and it's University of Utah. There's more and more coming, more and more interested. That's great because this is also a place where the academia is doing some of the heavy lifting, and the industry is benefiting from that directly, and that whole enablement is done through government funds. And this is fascinating because it allows for research in various categories, and not just now, but going all the way to 6G, you will see this. But it's starting with Open RAN. There's just a lot of things happening. Very much government is front and central in this. So they have played a huge role in enabling this.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, you can see in the UK as well, where there's a lot of funds going to universities, which I guess is interesting because of the lack of talent, or the that we're seeing in telecoms, where it's hard to attract people. So I guess it's a way to encourage interest, encourage research starting from universities all the way into any stage within the ecosystem. And the ecosystem clearly is more complex. Now, you work with operators worldwide, well, operators and vendors, I would say, worldwide. How do you see the difference? You mentioned before, Japan as a, they've been doing a lot of Open RAN way earlier, but there is some Open RAN in China as well. Despite the vendors are not really, the Chinese vendors are not supporting it. And so how do you see it? Because there is the situation in the US, Europe, and what about emerging countries, or basically everybody else? How do you see the different geographic areas to move onto Open RAN? Or not to move into Open RAN?
Yeah, so good question. We see a lot of activity in India as well. We've seen, other countries, South American countries, show interest. Clearly, Japan, Europe, and now United States, brownfield has also come to play. Clearly, we had the greenfield operators already in play. So I think these are some of the core drivers, but clearly there's interest in other countries like Korea, India. All of these are looking at working more and more on it. Everybody is looking, from an operator perspective, they're looking at the inflection point. Like I said, it could be a new spectrum allocation. It could be an area where you have contracts expiring, and this is an opportunity. Certainly, we have not seen from a barrier from operators saying, I don't want to do this, because everybody knows this is going to, in the end, give more opportunity for operators. Let's not forget the whole O-RAN movement was started by the operators. The O-RAN Alliance was created by the operators, for the operators, because they wanted more choice. They wanted more flexibility, and they obviously have seen the value of that with SDN and NFV in the past. So this is not something unique just to Open RAN. They've seen that in virtualization of core, again, software-defined networking. All of these are areas where that certainly is something they've not given up on, and they're actively pursuing it. It's a question of what is the right inflection point for each of these operators. And the story is different, even within a country, even within a geographic region. It depends on what you've deployed already and how you're going to monetize, next. And if that is going to come with a refresh or a new spectrum or some new use cases, certainly Open RAN is viewed as a very viable choice to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And although in different countries, so for different operators, the drivers might be different. And as I said, I think it's really important to keep in mind that it was initiated by operators. However, at the beginning, the discussion, if not the operator's intent, was that the reason why you move to Open RAN is a cost saving path strategy. But the more I talk to operator, the more it seems like operators are clearly cost saving is always a good thing, but it's not really the primary thing. It's a much wider, it's a much more strategic choice in terms of that's the way you need to evolve. In the same way that 5G can be more efficient than 4G, but you don't move to 5G to save money. It's a much wider choice. So I would say that for Open RAN 2, there seems to be, it's not just a question of saving OpEx in the short term, which might or actually not be, there might not be such a huge cost advantage in the short term. It's more in the long term. Is that what you see, or do you see different drivers towards Open RAN for different operators? So for instance, is in India, are Indian operators moving towards Open RAN in a different way than say AT&T or Deutsche Telekom are?
Yeah, everybody is evaluating their customer base, right? I mean, it's cost is always a factor with operators, but it's also what do the customers get if I move to or deploy this technology? That is always a question that is in the minds of operators. The fascination from every operator is clearly things like the RIC and so on. Now, it might have different incarnations as to how it is deployed, as an example, right? Because RIC is something Open RAN brings up, which traditional networks don't bring up. You're not going to get that. But it's also a game changer because now you really are looking at it from a network view, not just a RAN view, not just a core view, and the policies and the potential with AI ML that gets in there is fascinating for everyone. But what is the right timing is always the question. And the timing is, if I've already deployed a lot of my network with what I have, do I have enough for me to rip and replace yet? Probably not. In many cases, that's the answer you get. But are they giving up on it? Absolutely not, because there is going to be that next inflection point. And that inflection point is different for different operators, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's look a little bit, we're close to the end here, so maybe we can look a little bit in the future. So, okay, we talked about being at an inflection point. Operator seems to be ready to deploy. If you were to just look at it, and obviously we don't know the answer yet, but do you think that operators will generally move to an Open RAN approach, all of them, and for their networks? Clearly there is legacy they cannot change, but is that going to become mainstream, or is it going to be only part of their network going to be Open RAN?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think over time, this has the potential to be mainstream. There is no doubt about it. Now, is that 3 years, 5 years, 7 years away? Certainly, it has got the potential. And we have some precedents to that. We are seeing that, core network is a great example of things being virtualized. And nobody thinks of core not being virtualized these days. But it took 10 years. So you're going to see over a period of time, this technology being adopted. And it will get mainstream. Certainly that it has got the potential to do that. There is just a lot of other things that will come in, like, the value add applications. And that's where the true power of Open RAN will come into play, because you're going to open up to very specific niche applications that can really translate into innovation that is useful for the end consumer, and also cost savings, like the energy savings for the operator themselves. So there is going to be just a lot of value there, and we already see the potential. It's certainly looks like that's where it's headed.
Yeah, and I guess that we should really look at and probably do look at Open RAN as just part of the RAN transformation. So when you work with an operator, you're not working just on Open RAN. You're working on the whole. Well, the whole RAN, or the whole network, or the whole transformation. So it's not just one single thing that sticks out. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Final question for you. So how is it changing? What is it we should expect? Anything new from Keysight coming up that is not confidential, that you can share, in terms of, like, what is your deployment in terms of strategy or high level goals?
Yeah, so from day one, we have looked at Open RAN as an end-to-end story for Keysight. And Keysight certainly has all the assets to put in place where we can do this holistically, both on a horizontal, what I call edge to core, which is what I drive from the edge of the network to the core of the network, and also vertically as you start looking at things like, energy efficiency, more app testing and things like that. We definitely see a lot of breadth and depth that we can provide. And what we have also seen is we are very happy to have enabled several customers take this from a lab to a live network. Examples such as Dish and so on, where we have been working from day one, and we had a common vision of taking this from monolith into a disaggregated, containerized type of environment. And we pretty much have our hands on all the elements, and that continues to be our strategy. We are certainly looking at how we can enable more and more vendors and operators and be in the forefront of this. So certainly it's a continuation of what we got into, and it's a validation also for us. That's a nice thing when we see operators take this live. There's no more joy than seeing that we have enabled it. So Keysight's very proud of that. I'm very proud of that as well.
Well, okay, Karen, thank you so much for participating, and Kendra, over to you.
Thanks. That will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you to our speakers for that great conversation, and thanks to our audience for your wonderful questions. A recorded version of today's webinar will be available at sensafili.com in the coming days. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.